fallout from the sudden resignation of the U.S. National Security Advisor continues to rumble through the halls of the White House and the Kremlin, highlighting the work of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, including gains made in cutting childhood mortality. Africa 54's Lino Mudu spoke with Melinda Gates. And Kenya Airways promises a comeback as the pride of Africa. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent Makori. This is Africa 54. Now, as the firestorm surrounding the resignation of U.S. President Donald Trump's national security advisor continues to singe the White House, the president blasts the media for reporting alleged links between him and Russia, which he says is meant to undermine his November election win over Hillary Clinton. Beyond the politics, this controversy could have far-ranging implications. VOA national security correspondent Jeff Selden has more.
As a new day dawned on the Trump White House, the president took to Twitter with a backhanded defense of his former national security advisor. Why are there so many illegal leaks coming out of Washington? Trump tweeted. Later, White House spokesman Sean Spicer doubled down.
That's a real concern for this president. We have to wonder whether or not people who work for our government, who are entrusted with classified information and decisional-based materials, are leaking that information out.
Former officials and others agree the leaks are not ideal, but call Mike Flynn's resignation embarrassing and worry the problems run deeper. Senate Armed Services Committee Chairman Republican John McCain labeled Flynn's resignation a troubling indication of the dysfunction of the current national security apparatus. He added, it raises further questions about the Trump administration's intentions toward Vladimir Putin's Russia. Russian lawmakers fired back.
This turns out to be an attack against us purporting that we discussed something improper with a national security advisor.
The timing for a young administration far from ideal.
Just as you were beginning to get some takeoff in organizing a rather unconventional National Security Council staff and national security policy, the key engineer of all that is gone.
The importance of which cannot be understated for U.S. allies, still trying to get a feel for Trump foreign policy doctrine.
It's a key role, probably as important as what the diplomacy coming out of the State Department, the ambassadors, or the Defense Department is coming out with.
Former National Security Council officials say there's still time for the Trump administration to turn things around, and that a new national security advisor can help, though it may not be enough.
Having him releasing information, releasing statements that are probably not cleared through a conventional White House clearance process, I think is problematic, and I think it's going to come back to haunt him down the road in ways that we can't even foresee at this point.
Just one of the challenges for whoever steps into the key advisory role. Jeff Selden, VOA News, Washington.
Well, President Trump promised to be an agent of change during last year's election campaign, and so far his efforts to deliver on that pledge have produced mixed results. Trump has issued a series of executive orders that pleased supporters but antagonized opponents. VOA national correspondent Jim Malone has this early assessment of the president's political impact.
So help me God. Congratulations, Mr. President.
Donald Trump's presidency began with a bold promise of political change.
January 20th, 2017 will be remembered as the day the people became the rulers of this nation again.
Trump's flurry of executive orders in the first weeks of his presidency have pleased core supporters like Jim Bowman in Wisconsin.
And I know it's trite, but it's people want to change. And they saw, it's my personal opinion, they saw Donald Trump as someone that, like him or not, things are going to change.
The people united will never be divided.
Trump's temporary immigration travel ban sparked fierce opposition around the country and successful legal challenges in federal court. Supporters like Trump's bold use of presidential power, but it alarms Democrats like Senator Richard Blumenthal.
The independence of our judiciary means that our Constitution remains the law of the land. even if President Trump seeks to put himself above the law.
Though wary of Trump's blunt style, congressional Republicans like House Speaker Paul Ryan remain supportive.
Look, I know he's an unconventional president. He gets frustrated with judges. We get frustrated with judges, but he's respecting the process, and I think that's what counts at the end of the day.
Republicans are likely to stick with Trump as long as the political base they share is happy, says John Fortier.
If the president is able to succeed with that Congress in some of his initiatives, I think that's helpful to him. But if he starts to falter, then I think you really do see potentially it's much more difficult to hold the party together.
Trump's bold but at times divisive nature is likely to be held in check over time, says analyst James Thurber.
And so this rule of law, transparency, and the media and all these institutions will check him. It will be agonizing for some people because of his behavior, but eventually he will be checked in terms of radical changes.
Trump's latest political distraction is the political fallout from the resignation of his national security advisor, retired General Michael Flynn. For the moment, though, Trump's aggressive style is likely to continue, drawing kudos from supporters as well as intense opposition from critics. Jim Malone, VOA News, Washington.
Well, Kenya's Court of Appeal on Wednesday ordered the release from jail of officials from the National Doctors Union so they can negotiate with the government over a strike that is paralyzing the public health sector. The 7 union officials were ordered to serve a 1-month jail term Monday after a lower court found them guilty of contempt of court in relation to the strike, which started in December. Court of Appeals Judge Hannah Okwengu has given the parties in the labor dispute 7 days to find a resolution. The Law Society of Kenya and the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, who appeared as interested parties, were ordered to mediate the dispute and report back to the court. The strike has angered Kenyans and turned the controversy into a test of President Uhuru Kenyatta's leadership ahead of an election in August this year. Well, as thousands of South Sudanese refugees continue to pour into Uganda to escape attacks from armed forces, the United Nations Refugee Agency is sounding an alarm. It says the dire situation has created the 3rd largest refugee crisis after Syria and Afghanistan. VOA's Mariama Diallo reports.
The ongoing violence in Africa's newest country has created the continent's largest refugee crisis. Via Skype from Geneva, Babar Baloch, UNHCR spokesperson.
We now have 1.5 million refugees that have fled South Sudan, seeking safety and taking refuge in the neighboring countries.
Uganda is the largest recipient of South Sudanese refugees.
Around 700,000 have fled to Uganda. Others have gone to Sudan, Ethiopia, DRC, Central African Republic as well. And what we have seen is that all these communities in the neighboring countries who are welcoming the South Sudanese refugees, they don't have enough themselves.
Sida Hawa and her 6 children recently arrived in Kuluba, a small town in northern Uganda.
I had just planted some crops and I was waiting to harvest. I lost everything because of the war. They are killing people.
Raymond Tawongo barely escaped his hometown on an old bicycle. He lost everything when his village was attacked.
Look at me. I'm wearing torn, dirty clothes. We sleep in the bush. This is a terrible situation.
Hawa and Tawongo are among the thousands of refugees streaming into Uganda since intense fighting broke out again in July following the collapse of a peace deal between the government and opposition forces. Brian Adeba says it's time to focus on the root causes of the conflict.
These charades that are taking place, like the national dialogue, which is not inclusive, the statements by JMEC, the organization that is supposed to oversee this peace agreement, the statements that allude to the fact that, hey, everything is moving on smoothly. This is just a phantom process, and we need to recognize the peace deal for what it is. It is dead.
For that, Adeba says all the parties involved need to return to the negotiating table.
The government is a key actor in this conflict, and it needs to be at the table. The SPLM-IO in opposition, led by Dr. Riek Machar, has to be at the negotiating table as well. But we also have to be cognizant of the groups, the armed groups that have come up. There are several of them in the Equatorias and in Upper Nile that need to be brought to the table.
The Joint Monitoring and Evaluation Commission has called upon all the parties involved to cease all military activity. Mariama Jallo, VOA News.
Well, we want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we covered. During the conversation on Facebook, the address is Africa 54. We are also streaming our show live on Facebook, so check us out and share our show with your friends. And also check us out, our headlines, 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Find me on Twitter at VOA Vince Makori. Now, coming up, highlighting the global gains of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Stay with us.
News and notes. This is Living Better.
Regular visits to the sauna could help lower the risk of developing dementia and Alzheimer's disease, a new study suggests. After following more than 2,300 middle-aged Finnish men for more than 20 years, University of Eastern Finland researchers found a link between sauna visits and memory diseases.
We know that during the sauna heart rate increases, we start sweating, and this is a bit like a physical exercise. Heart rate can increase up to level 100 or even 150 in some cases.
Lead researcher Jari Laakkonen, the study found that men who went to the sauna 4 to 7 times a week were 66% less likely to be diagnosed with dementia or Alzheimer's disease. Previous studies have suggested that frequent sauna users also reap a benefit of better heart health as well. I'm Martin Seacrest for VOA's Living Better.
Welcome back. Now, today we have a special Wednesday edition health report. Africa 54 Health correspondent Lina Madu begins a two-part series highlighting the work of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, including the inroads made in cutting childhood mortality. Lino.
That's right, Vincent. Philanthropists Bill and Melinda Gates have just released their annual letter highlighting gains made in global development, including a mother's well-being, education, and childhood health. Efforts of organizations such as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation have helped save the lives of 122 million children since 1990. I spoke by phone with Melinda Gates in a VOA exclusive interview and asked her what is her reaction to the progress made in global development.
Well, the progress is really astounding, and it's the progress that the world has made. And so it makes me even more optimistic about what we can do in the future, because not only has this progress been made about lives saved, about people lifted out of poverty, but it's accelerating now, particularly in the last 5 years. So there is so much more that can be done.
One of the examples is the number of childhood deaths per year has been cut in half, according to the United Nations, since 1990, and 122 million have been saved. These numbers are really, really encouraging.
They are absolutely encouraging, and the great thing now is we have even more data. We know what has saved those children's lives. It's been predominantly malarial bed nets and vaccines, but we're seeing the number of children's deaths go down, and we're also seeing that, okay, the deaths that are still left are particularly these newborn lives, these first 30 days. 1 million kids die on the first day of life. And so we also know now, okay, this is where we also need to act.
So how do we act?
We get more data. And so one of the things that we point out in the annual letter is that parents in Africa are letting us actually do now very thoughtfully these minimally invasive autopsies, and it allows them to understand what did their child actually die from, and then they let us use that information, that data, so that we can understand what lots of kids die from, and then put great tools behind that. And that's actually really exciting.
The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has played an important role in global development and improving health. What did it take to achieve this gain in children's health in particular?
First of all, the foundation does all the work that we do is with partners all over the world. There's nothing we do without a partner being involved. And the other great thing is that the United Nations set before these Millennium Development Goals. They're now the Sustainable Development Goals. But it gave a roadmap, a blueprint to the world of how should we tackle death and disability around the world. And so one of the things that the foundation focused on with our many partners was on these childhood deaths. And a lot of new vaccines came out, particularly around pneumonia deaths and diarrheal deaths. Those are the two biggest killers of children still around the world. We needed new vaccines that didn't exist for those. Those vaccines now not only exist, but they're being delivered all over the world in some of the most remote rural places in Kenya and India and Tanzania. Parents are accepting them. The vaccination rate is up to 86% now around the world. We need to get that, honestly, to 100%, but parents are seeing the benefit of that. And parents are also choosing to get a malarial bed net because governments are now giving them out all over Africa, and they're not only getting them, they're actually sleeping under them because they see the benefits for themselves and their children of fewer malarial episodes in their households.
And you mentioned vaccine. Would you elaborate on how investing in childhood immunization is not just good for the child's health, but also beneficial to the economy, because that's something that a lot of people are really struggling with to understand.
If a child grows up healthy, and then they have their greatest potential of being educated and going on to get a job and producing economic means for their own family. And ultimately, if they lift up their family, they're lifting up their community and they're lifting up a whole economy. So we call that the demographic dividend. That is, if you get a healthy population of kids that get educated and then get into their productive working years, late in their teenage years, literally you see gains in your economy overall. But they have to start healthy in life, which is why vaccines are so important, why getting fewer malarial episodes is important, why getting the right nutrition is important so that they can grow and reach the potential they have, both cognitively and developmentally.
So moving forward, what are some of the key issues that will be on top of the agenda for the foundation, especially with childhood health?
Well, you're going to see us continue to make investments and maybe more investments in nutrition because, as I mentioned, that first 1,000-day window is so important that if a child doesn't grow up healthy, they don't have the chance to reach their full cognitive. Where they grow up and what their immune system is facing in those first few years of life is very different in a country like Uganda versus Kenya versus South Africa. So we don't even understand as a world enough about a child's gut to understand exactly what interventions we should make. Should we give them more zinc? Should we give them more vitamin A, more vitamin D? So until that research agenda gets completed and filling it out will help us understand how to make the most key investments. You'll see us continuing on vaccines and really looking at this first 30 days of life of what else we can do to save so many children that die in those first 30 days.
Tomorrow we'll have part 2 of my interview with Melinda Gates, during which we discuss women's health and how she perceives the status of women and girls globally. Now, Southern Africa is beginning to come to grips with an invasive species that is wreaking havoc with its corn crops. It's a South American insect called a fall armyworm, and in Zambia alone, it may be on the way to destroying about 40% of that nation's maize harvest. VOA's Kevin Enox has more.
Researchers at the Center for Agriculture and Biosciences International in England are studying the fall armyworm, trying to find ways to combat its rapid spread across southern Africa.
It came in, we think, through trade potentially, and it loves maize, but not only maize, also other crops. So we're extremely concerned over this problem because maize is the largest grown cereal in sub-Saharan Africa.
The UN's Food and Agriculture Organization is holding an emergency meeting in Zimbabwe this week to discuss ways to coordinate the fight against the pest. But Voss says it's too late to stop the invasion.
They often come in as an egg mass or as a pupa, and they're very, very small and difficult to be noticed. So what is important is to know how it looks like when it comes out and how the damage looks like, so that you can react very, very early. And we think that window has been missed on this occasion.
Voss and her fellow researchers are now trying to find environmentally friendly ways to stop the armyworm's spread. And the Zambian government is stockpiling seed and pesticides as it ramps up the fight against this new and voracious invader. Kevin Enochs, VOA News, Washington.
That's our health report for today. To stay in touch, find me on Twitter at Lenore Moudou. Back to you, Vincent.
Wow. Thanks a lot, Lino. Now, in Wednesday's business news, key developments in mobile payment and artificial intelligence are being rolled out in Africa. Here with details is Africa 54 business correspondent Jill Malandrino reporting from the NASDAQ market site in New York.
The overriding theme for 2017 is expanding the tech outreach in Africa, and there are two brand new developments to report in mobile payments and media. First, MasterCard commits to empowering over 150,000 micro, small, and medium enterprises, or what's known as MSME. Now, this is taking place in Kenya within 2017 by giving them access to MasterPass QR. The mobile-driven person-to-merchant payment solution will be introduced through various financial institutions and other partners in the market from February onwards. Secondly, return to AI, or artificial intelligence, and this is something that is taking the tech vertical by storm. At AFCON, tech startup Controvert Media implemented the use of artificial intelligence robots to automatically write and post news articles on the internet. Now, you may be wondering, why would a reporter choose to highlight this bit of news for obvious reasons? But that is simply not the case. Speaking about the introduction of artificial intelligence bot, Controvert Media CEO William Choi highlighted the contrary to the belief that the artificial intelligence apps will push people out of jobs. That's simply not the case. This is an opinion that's held by many, but think about it this way. The AI apps will actually create job opportunities. Let's go back to 1999. All the jobs brought about by the internet didn't exist back then. Jobs like social media manager, blogger, or mobile app developer, or the possibility to do animation for a film studio in Hollywood while you're sitting at your desk in Zimbabwe. From the NASDAQ market site in New York, I'm Jill Malandrino, and this is Africa 54 Business News.
Well, thanks a lot, Jill. It's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54. Kenya Airways promises a comeback as the pride of Africa. We'll be right back.
Pending the hearing of the appeal.
Ah, it's back again.
By the President, His Excellency Adam Barrow, James time often last out at the former colonial power for its past. However, the visit of Boris Johnson in office, the coalition government under the leadership of
Welcome back. Kenya Airways celebrated its 40th anniversary in January, promising to make a comeback and live up to its motto as the pride of Africa. Africa 54's Esther Githuiwat has that story.
Kenya Airways, also known as KQ, ranks as Africa's fourth largest airline, but its fortunes have dwindled over the last couple of years, raising concerns over its ability to remain afloat. The airline reported massive losses during the 2014-2015 financial year, amounting to $25 million. Kenyan politicians blamed the national carrier, which is partly owned by the government, of mismanagement. But financial experts say the airline's losses arose from travel warnings issued by Western nations as a result of terrorist attacks from Al-Shabaab, leading to falling tourism, as well as reduced travel to West Africa during the Ebola epidemic and competition from other airlines using the same routes. During celebrations to mark its 40th year, the air carrier's CEO, Ngunze, acknowledged the airline has had some trouble.
It has not always been a cruise flight. There has been turbulence along the way, but we have always managed to fly through. That turbulence strengthens our resolve, not only to improve our safety culture, but to also innovate our approach to business.
Kenya's tourism peaked between 2002 and 2011, shining a spotlight on the East African carrier as one that would bring Africa's aviation industry into the global limelight. But competition from other airlines like Ethiopian Airlines, which has been in operation since 1945, has cast a shadow over that spotlight. Mr. Ngunze, however, believes that shadow is fading away and the carrier's fortunes are trending upward.
The last 4 decades have seen KQ connect Africa to the world and the world to Africa, not only transporting people and goods, but also laying the foundation for the modern civilization through commerce.
Ethiopian Airlines is the most competitive Africa-based airline, with direct flights to and from the US, as well as 9 routes to Asia and other destinations across Africa. But with its main focus on Africa, Kenya Airways is now negotiating direct flights to and from the US, and so far it commands 4 routes to Asia and parts of the Middle East, and it hopes to expand its reach to meet the rising needs of the air traveler.
The aviation space in Africa is growing, and we are poised to take advantage of this. It will demand our passion, commitment, and expertise to remain competitive and dynamic as an airline, and one to reckon with in years to come.
Kenya relies heavily on the tourism industry as a foreign currency earner. The Kenya Tourist Board is aggressively marketing the country as a world-class tourist destination, using its diverse culture, social media, as well as renowned Kenyan athletes to raise the profile of what it calls a magical Kenya. And Kenya Airways hopes to tap into these efforts to reclaim what it says is its rightful title as the pride of Africa. Esther Gidhui-Ewart, VOA News, Washington.
And that's our show for today. Now be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com for more news. Tune in to VOA's evening radio show, Africa News Tonight at 1800 UTC and in the mornings. Today Break Africa between 0300 and 0600 UTC Monday through Friday. Thanks a lot for watching. From all of us in Washington, have a good night.
Welcome to English in a Minute. When something loses its original shape or form, it does not look very natural or comfortable.
Bent out of shape.
Hey, did you tell Greg about my dinner party?
Yeah, I did. I thought he was invited.
Well, now he's all bent out of shape because I didn't invite him.
I'm sorry. Can you invite him now?
It's too late. His feelings are already hurt.
A person who is bent out of shape is upset or even angry about something. A person can get bent out of shape if they do not like the way someone is treating them. In our example, Greg is bent out of shape because Anna did not tell him about her dinner party. And that's English in a Minute.